There are few artists that can address the clash between tradition, culture, family, and growing up today with more insight and humor than Nadia Manzoor. Nadia is an actor, writer, and producer. She spent her earlier years in a Pakistani Muslim home in North London and has since moved from Singapore to Dubai, from Boston to her home base now in Brooklyn. In the past year, she has created and acted in the successful web series Shugs and Fats. She has had sold-out runs of her one-woman show BurqOff in New York, LA, San Francisco, and London. She pushes to ask those provocative questions and is challenging constantly the status quo in the South Asian community. Joining us now to talk to us about the inspiration behind her sellout show is Nadia Manzoor. Thanks for joining us. A lot of us as mothers on the site have actually reflected on what it's like growing up female versus growing up as a South Asian male. Can you talk about some of the differences you've seen growing up female in your home?
Yeah, I mean, from the earliest I can remember, my mind wasn't something that was celebrated or encouraged. The development of my mind or my intellectual pursuits, or even like my physical abilities. My sense of accomplishment and reward came from being attractive, right? Or lack of being attractive. So, I remember the first time I told my dad, it's in the play, that I wanted to be an astronaut. I was obsessed with space and, the idea of infinity. And, my dad kind of laughed in my face and he was like, Beta, what do you mean you want to be an astronaut?
And that's actually reflective of a skit in your actual show, too.
Yeah, totally, And he's like, what is your husband going to do if you're floating about in space? And it was this immediate thing, which is like my existence is for the betterment of a man, My dad used to really enjoy the fact that I was kind of comedic at home and was a goofball, and he would always say lovingly to me, oh, one day you're going to make a man very happy.
Oh.
It was always, that was the purpose. But it wasn't seen in a malicious way. It was just kind of this accepted, fact of life. And, even though I went to a good school and I was educated, it was always seen so that it was part of me becoming more of a holistic woman for my husband. Mm-hmm. Whereas my brother was, encouraged to do all kinds of sports and take risks. And, my dad used to test him on all of the capitals of the world. And, but he didn't care if I knew any capitals of the world. He would just make sure he would control the amount of, French fries I ate. That was kind of my discipline.
Oh,
and so there was a big difference in that, everything was in relationship to how I looked. So whether I was getting too fat or whether I had long hair, clothes I wore, everything was in relationship to my aesthetic appeal. And if I didn't have aesthetic appeal, I wouldn't be picked. And if you don't get picked by a man, then what is your purpose? Where is your role?
You had a sort of a cultural kind of journey, sort of caught between kind of two cultures when you were growing up. Can you talk about whether, what role comedy played in managing that particular experience for yourself?
Yeah, sure. I've been thinking a lot about this because, before, I wouldn't have ever identified as a comedian, but I think looking back in my childhood, because I had a really hard time fitting in because I wasn't really able to be, the typical Westerner, mm-hmm. I was just kind of naturally this goofball. And I always did a lot of voices and characters and jokes, and I kind of self-defined myself as the weirdo and the class clown. And I think it was a way that I kind of diverted the attention from how different I was, and how during the month of Ramadan I'd have to stay inside because everyone was eating, or I wasn't allowed to wear shorts or show my legs, and so I just kind of made myself funny.
Right.
And I was able to make people laugh. And so that kind of became my thing. I was Noddy, the weirdo in school throughout my whole school life. But I never really identified as oh, I'm a funny person. It's just kind of who I became.
Okay.
And then the role of humor later on, when it became a lot more conscious, through the play itself, it was twofold. One was it was an access that allowed me to go into some really difficult, confusing times with an approach that made it just so much easier, you know? Humor is just like this easy access point. And then the second point is that it became a way that people could relate to me by allowing them to laugh at yourself, by getting off on stage and like making a fool out of yourself. People have permission to laugh at you, which is also permission to be open. Mm-hmm. And so they're able to kind of like receive the message in a different way. So, so definitely conscious and, you know, healing and also intentional in my use of how I wanted to like get the message across.
You've been quoted as saying you've obviously had a struggle with your identity and your moral compass. Can you tell me what you've, I guess, done over the years to come to terms with that now?
What have I done? Sure. I mean, one thing is I've allowed myself to live a more open and public life in spite of the contradictions and struggles. So in many ways, you know, of course, I haven't got everything figured out in terms of my morality or what I believe. I think it's an evolving journey in terms of our values. But before, my sense of morality came from a very rigid, kind of like dogmatic sense that came from my family, and there wasn't a lot of questioning, and there wasn't much of an opening for things to be discussed. And now I kind of present myself. I'm always like, I put myself on the table. I put my questions about life and morality and feminism, ethics, always on the table for discussion with the community that I'm in, whether it's my work team or my relationships or my friends or my family. It's very much kind of like a process of discovery, whereas before it was kind of like there was a list of rules that I was supposed to follow, and if I didn't, I was a bad Muslim or a bad woman or a bad person.
As far as being open about, you know, who you were or answering questions about, you know, where you come from, so to speak, at school, how open were you with, you know, with your friends, just your regular friends at school?
About what, sorry?
Just about your culture, your upbringing. I mean, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I used to lie about it. From as soon as, you know, that was also in the beginning of my play. So as soon as I became aware that I was a quote-unquote packy, and that wasn't something that was cool, it wasn't something that was normal. No kid wants to be like the odd one out, right? You're a kid. You don't understand identity. You just want to be accepted and normal and play with your friends.
That's right.
And, you know, my mom would come and pick me up dressed in shirakamis, like smelling of samosas. And everybody was like looking at this weird woman who came to pick me up in school and spoke in a funny language, you know. Yeah. And I didn't want to be that person. So I started lying. I remember I used to tell the parents of my friends that my brother's name was Kevin, because he has kind of like a hard name to pronounce, which is Khurram, and it sounds very Pakistani. Mm-hmm. So I'd be like, yeah, my brother's name's Kevin, and I wouldn't tell people that, you know, we went to Pakistan, that we went to LA, or I would like imagine these like very white-sounding places that we went to for holiday, or, you know, I would conceal parts of myself that I felt were funny or odd. It wasn't until I became, you know, maybe 13, 14, 15, where, you know, it became obvious that I was a Muslim, because I wouldn't, you know, there was Ramadan and I would take holidays for Eid, and, you know, I started to kind of use it in a way because it became cool. Oh, wow, she can read Arabic and she can, you know, speak this funny language that doesn't make sense to her. So I did start to embrace it a little bit more in my teenage years, but I definitely found ways to conceal it as well.
Fast forward to who you are today and sort of your journey of making BurqOff. Can you talk about, first of all, the title? Can you give us some insight on that? Where did you come up with that from?
So it's actually a friend of mine who came up with it, a playwright, amazing playwright and friend of mine called Brendan. And it was a process of just like thinking of all of these different names. And at one point, you know, I think it was like the Little Packy or Dirty Little Packy. I had all these different names. And then BurqOff was something my friend mentioned, and it was kind of like playing around for a while. And then I think it hit the nail on the head eventually, not only because it has, you know, a provocative sound to it, but it's also the metaphor behind taking the burqa off, or another way of saying that is taking off the veil or the layers of disguise that we tend to walk around with, and taking it off and being who we are inside and underneath it all, you know. And of course, the burqa is kind of, reflective of the Muslim tradition, so I use that as well. And it's also saying, like, back off, BurqOff, let me be who I am, give me a minute to explain myself, Yeah.
So what is your, I guess, favorite part of the show? What's your favorite, I guess, character?
I love playing my mum. I love it. I love playing my mum. She's just, for a few reasons. One is that she radiated such an abundance of joy and love in her being. And so when I get to embody that, I'm filled up with love myself, And and she's such a beautiful person. And then, of course, I lost my mother to cancer when I was 20, which was an extremely difficult, confusing time for me. So being able to bring her back is a tribute to her, and I've been able to heal my the death of my mother, and I've been able to kind of heal myself, and I wondered for many years how would I fulfill her legacy, because she really was such a wonderful woman, and I felt overwhelmed by that. And I feel by portraying her in an honest way that I've been able to do that. There have been times when her friends or her family have come to see the show, and they've had to leave halfway because they've been like, I felt like I got to be with a diva again, and I wasn't able to take it. So to me, that is a very emotionally real reason,
And did you ever think that, this part of your life or your journey, you've got many more years, obviously, you're really young, but that your growing up period would become part of a sellout show?
No, of course not. I mean, who thinks that ever? I mean, maybe there are people, but I definitely didn't. I didn't even identify or think of myself as a performer, because that wasn't even conceivable for a person like me.
Right.
I had to lock my door when I was a kid at night so I could dance in my room, to Janet Jackson, and practice my dance moves with makeup in front of the mirror, because I loved to dance,
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't something that, I ever was able to identify. I already been identified myself as a performer in the true sense, and really owned that in the past, 2 years.
And, obviously you talk about your dad quite a bit. How has this show affected him and the way he sees himself?
So he often says, when people ask him after the show, will you really like that? And he always says, he's like, that is exactly what I was like. And I have now changed. My daughter has helped me change, but yes, I'm afraid I was like that. And I think it's given him this, this distance to be able to see a reflection of him through his child's eyes. It's obviously not every single part of him. You can't portray every nuance about a person in a one-woman show. But I think it's given him an appreciation for the perspective of his children on him and how difficult it was for us, And he, not just as a result of the show, but through our evolving relationship and struggle for honesty between us, he's found a new way of thinking too, which is quite extraordinary. He's become, honestly, one of the biggest fans of the show, one of my biggest supporters. He single-handedly, took on the marketing needs for the London show in September last year. And, he was like, Beta, I'm going to sell it out.
That's awesome.
And he did. He sold out the show. It was amazing. And so I think it's also been very healing and powerful for our relationship. It's another thing I would have never thought that.
That's amazing. Wow. Just a last question for you. With respect to all the, the cultural things that get portrayed in the media, and I mean, I know that you're technically considered you're out in the media, you're doing this play, and do you feel like, have you had any feedback from our own community other than your family, and what kind of feedback have you received?
So on the whole, I get very, very positive feedback, congratulating me, thanking me for doing the show, that people are able to relate. They're like, that's my life story on there. I can't believe you had so many similarities to me from many different generations of people, and also different cultures of people and different genders, which always amazes me. You know, one time I had this older white man hug me, and he was like, "Thank you for healing me through your show. That was my life."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Really?" You know, it was pretty amazing. And then, you know, I have had some feedback, which is, you know, why is Nadia putting her family's life on stage?
Yes.
That's not what people from our culture do, right. You know. And the funny thing is, you know, even though that's true, that's not typically what people from our culture do. Right. I think it's something that we need to do.
That's right.
You know, especially, you know, not in necessarily a disrespectful way, but I think one of the reasons why there's so much of these, like, you know, these double lives or the secrecy in our culture is because we're not open and honest about what goes on. And it's not about defaming your culture or defaming your family, but it's about speaking about things honestly and openly with an open heart. And, you know, that's what I'm trying to do with this show. I'm not trying to make a mockery of where I come from. I mean, of course, there's humor and comedy and things, but I think it's important that we look at our traditions and laugh at things in order for us to grow and become better.